June 1943. The sea was supposed to be empty. That was the lie every sailor told himself to survive the night. The warship moved forward without lights, cutting through the black Atlantic like a ghost, its steel hull groaning softly with each rise and fall of the waves. No moon, no stars. Only darkness pressed down from every direction, thick enough to feel. Somewhere beneath that water, somewhere close, something was hunting. On deck, men stood at their posts without speaking. They had learned that silence was safer than prayer. Every sound carried: the slow churn of propellers, the faint whistle of cold wind through cables, the quiet creak of metal expanding and shrinking with the temperature. Even breathing felt loud. Each man knew the truth they never said out loud. German U-boats loved nights like this. Submarines didn't announce themselves. They waited, patient, invisible. One torpedo was enough to end everything. Below deck, far from the guns and lookout towers, the ship's galley was dim and cramped. The air smelled faintly of potatoes, old grease, and steam that never fully escaped. It was here, under flickering bulbs and low-hanging pipes, that the cook worked alone. His name barely mattered to anyone else on board. He was middle-aged, shoulders permanently slumped from long hours and little sleep, hands rough from peeling and scrubbing rather than fighting. While others carried rifles or monitored sonar screens, he carried ladles. While officers studied maps, he measured rations that never seemed enough. If the ship was a body, he was one of its unseen organs essential. But ignored. Tonight, he hadn't slept. The motion of the ship made his stomach uneasy, though years at sea had dulled most sensations. Still, something felt wrong. The air inside the galley felt tighter than usual, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. Each distant vibration, each subtle shift in the deck beneath his boots made him pause, listening. He wiped his hands on a stained cloth and leaned against the counter, eyes fixed on nothing. Above him, dozens of men waited for orders that might never come. Beneath them, the ocean hid its teeth. The cook knew the routines by heart, the night patrols, the hours of waiting, the way conversations always died after midnight. He had heard the story: ships vanishing without warning, caught unaware by enemies no one could see, meals abandoned on tables, bunks left warm by men who would never return. A faint shudder ran through the hull. He stiffened. It was probably nothing. The sea was full of harmless noises, or so they said. But war had taught everyone the same lesson. The deadliest dangers announced themselves quietly, if at all. The cook glanced toward the ladder leading up, then back at the supplies stacked beside him: barrels, crates, tools meant for feeding men, not saving them. No one expected anything extraordinary from a cook. No one ever would, and yet, as the ship continued its silent push through enemy waters, an idea, wild, reckless, and completely against protocol, began to take shape in his tired mind. Above deck, the crew stared into darkness, unaware that far below them, in the least important corner of the ship, a man no one watched was about to notice something no one else did, and in the next few minutes, one decision made, without rank, without orders, without permission, would decide whether they saw another dawn. Before the war, he had never set foot on a warship. He had been a dockside kitchen cook in Liverpool, the kind of man who woke before dawn to light stoves and stayed late wiping counters long after the last customer left. His world had been noise and warmth, clattering pans, shouted orders, the smell of fresh bread and boiling stew. He knew regulars by name. He measured his days by meals served, not miles traveled or enemy lines crossed. Then the war came. And like so many others, choice was replaced by necessity. At 42. He was already considered old by naval standards. Too slow for infantry, too stiff for gunnery crews. But the Navy always needed men who could feed others, and so he found himself in uniform, trained just enough to follow orders, and sent to sea with a ladle instead of a rifle. He learned quickly that rank ended where the galley began. Officers passed through without looking at him. Sailors thanked him when the food was good and cursed him when it wasn't. No one asked how he was holding up. The galley was his kingdom and his prison. It sat low in the ship where the air grew heavy and damp, pipes sweating overhead. walls forever coated with a thin film of grease no amount of scrubbing could remove. When the engines ran hard, the heat became unbearable. When ration deliveries were delayed, meals grew thinner, creativity replacing generosity. Fresh ingredients disappeared first, then sugar, then meat. Everything was counted. Everything was reused. Sleep came in broken hours. Sometimes he worked nearly 20 hours straight, feeding men in shifts that never seemed to end. Breakfast before dawn? Stew at midday. Whatever was left at night served quietly so it wouldn't carry sound across the water. Always quiet. Always dim. Always careful. He never complained. Complaints were dangerous. They spread faster than fear aboard a ship. And fear was already everywhere. The cook noticed things others missed. Not because he was smarter, but because he had time to watch. He watched hands shake as cups were lifted. He saw the way laughter died quickly after sunset. He heard fragments of conversations near the galley door, whispers about ships that never returned, about families who would never know what happened. He knew exactly when morale dipped because it was the day men stopped finishing their meals. Food was the ship's pulse. And he listened to it. He knew which sailors needed an extra scoop without asking. He knew when to slip someone a hard biscuit saved for later, and when to pretend not to notice a man pushing food away untouched. He understood fear the way a doctor understands illness, not something to cure, but something to manage long enough to survive. The officers rarely came below unless they had to. When they did, they smelled of cold night air and tobacco, their boots polished, their voices clipped. They spoke of tactics, bearings, and patrol routes. Never of hunger. Never of sleep. And certainly never of the cook. He wasn't offended. He had accepted his place early on. In war, everyone learned fast where they stood, still, even in the background. He paid attention. He learned the rhythm of the ship's engines the way he once learned the rhythm of ovens. He could tell when speed changed by the way pots rattled. He recognized rough seas by the swing of hanging lights before anyone announced it. Over months at sea, the ship became familiar. Every creak, every vibration, every sudden silence. Silences were the worst. When the ship went quiet, really quiet, it usually meant something was wrong. That night in June, the galley felt different. The pipes made an unfamiliar ticking sound, subtle but persistent. The deck vibrated unevenly, not with rough water, but with something he couldn't place. It reminded him of the moment just before a boil over when everything seemed normal. But tension gathered beneath the surface. He paused more often than usual. Hands resting on counters, listening, outside the galley. Footsteps passed softly, careful not to echo. The blackout rules were strict. Even a lit match could decide a ship's fate. And so men moved cautiously, as if the darkness itself might hear them. The cook thought of home then, of warm kitchens and loud mornings, of normality. War had taken him far from everything familiar, and yet somehow, here deep in the belly of a warship, he felt more awake than ever before. He didn't believe heroes looked heroic when the moment came. He believed they were usually tired, hungry, focused on something entirely different when responsibility found them. He wiped his hands again and moved a crate aside, revealing a corner he normally ignored. He wasn't sure what he was looking for yet, only that something wasn't right, and ignoring that feeling had never served him well in life. Above deck, officers scanned the horizon, tense but disciplined. Gunners waited for commands that might never arrive. Sonar operators strained to separate imagination from reality. And below, in the heat and shadows of the galley, the cook, the least important man on the ship, stood quietly, listening harder than anyone else. Whatever was coming, he would sense it first. And when the moment arrived, no one would be ready for what he chose to do next. By 1943, the Atlantic had become a graveyard. German U-boats had turned the ocean into a hunting ground. Silent killers slipping beneath Allied shipping lanes and waiting patiently for targets to wander into reach. They didn't need large fleets or loud battles. One well-placed torpedo, fired from invisibility, could erase a ship and everyone on it in seconds. No warning, no chance to fight back. Just fire, water, and darkness. The crew aboard this warship knew those stories by heart. They knew the numbers: 200s of vessels sunk, thousands of sailors lost, many without a single distress call ever sent. That knowledge sat heavy in every conversation, every silence. And now they were entering one of the most dangerous stretches of water on their route. Up on the bridge, officers studied charts lit by red-filtered lamps, fingers tracing lines they had followed before. This zone was marked bluntly in their minds: high risk. Too many disappearances. Too many reports that ended mid-sentence. The order came down quietly but firmly: alert status raised. No unnecessary movement. Absolute vigilance. Out on deck, lookouts leaned forward, eyes burning from constant strain, scanning a horizon that refused to give up its secrets. The sea looked calm, deceptively peaceful, its surface only slightly disturbed by the ship's passage. That was what made it worse. Calm seas favored submarines. Below them, deep beneath steel and water, sonar operators listened. Their headphones crackled with static and echo sounds that could be schools of fish, drifting debris, or death itself. Every ping returned uncertainty. A shape would appear, then fade. Another sound rose, then vanished before it could be confirmed. The ocean played tricks when nerves were tight. Probably nothing. Someone muttered. No one believed it. A sudden change in vibration ran through the ship, subtle but unmistakable. Not rough water. Not speed. Something else. Orders came sharper now. Hands tightened on instruments. Gunners hovered near their stations, waiting. Training took over, but training couldn't quiet imagination. Every man aboard had seen what happened to ships that hesitated. Down below, the cook felt the change instantly. The galley responded before the crew did. A ladle swayed where it shouldn't. A pot lid rattled softly, then stopped, as if embarrassed by the sound it had made. The hiss of steam from a pipe faltered, then resumed at a slightly altered rhythm. He froze. Listening, the ship was adjusting course, but not smoothly. More like a cautious sidestep. The cook had felt it before, weeks earlier during another tense night patrol. That time, it ended without incident. But this movement felt sharper, intentional. Footsteps hurried past the galley door, now heavier than before. A muffled voice snapped an order. Somewhere above, a hatch slammed shut. The cook moved closer to the bulkhead, placing his palm flat against the metal, cold, vibrating unevenly. Then came the sound, faint, almost imagined. A distant clank, carried through water and steel, low and unnatural. It wasn't part of the ship. It didn't belong. His stomach tightened. Up top, confusion spread. Sonar picked up something again, same bearing as before, closer now, but still unclear. The reading blurred between possibilities. An officer demanded confirmation. Another cautioned restraint. False alarms had rattled crews before, and wasting depth charges on shadows had cost ships dearly. Seconds stretched. Then the surface changed. A lookout's breath caught as he leaned closer to the rail. The water ahead rippled, oddly shaped, like something large had just moved beneath it. Too deliberate. Too slow? Did you see that? I saw something. Officers argued quietly but urgently. Protocol demanded certainty. Instinct demanded action. Below deck, the cook's eyes drifted to the stacked supplies along the wall: barrels, crates, tools secured for rough seas. He didn't know why he looked at them, only that his mind refused to stay still. His thoughts jumped ahead of reason, connecting sounds and movements the way recipes came together. Without conscious effort, another vibration rolled through the hull. This time, everyone felt it. A sharp alarm tone began to rise, then cut off abruptly. Orders were shouted, then muffled, as if swallowed by the ship itself. Somewhere forward, steel groaned under sudden strain. Panic hovered. Unspoken but thick, the cook gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles whitening. He knew that sound now. He had heard it once before, when another ship in the convoy changed speed suddenly after a contact report. That ship never rejoined them. He didn't need sonar. He didn't need confirmation. Whatever lurked below was close, very close. Above him, men scrambled to act within rules written for moments like this, but those same rules were slowing them down. The window for decision was narrowing with every passing heartbeat. The cook inhaled slowly, forcing his racing thoughts into focus. His gaze settled again on the supplies around him, objects meant to sustain life, not defend it. The irony almost made him laugh. Almost. Because somewhere below the waterline, an unseen enemy was lining up a shot, and the next move, whether it came from the bridge, the sonar room, or the lowest deck of all, would decide if this ship survived the night. The first real confirmation came not through instruments, but through fear. A lookout shouted, a sharp, involuntary sound that cut through the discipline of the night. Ahead of the ship, off the starboard bow, the sea surface buckled unnaturally. Not a wave, not wind. Something solid had disturbed it, something large and close enough to announce its presence without meaning to. Contact close. Orders spilled from the bridge all at once, overlapping, half swallowed by the wind. Turn to port. No hold course. Ready depth charges. Stand by. The seconds between commands stretched dangerously thin. The submarine was no longer just a possibility. It was there, somewhere beneath the hull. A German U-boat slid silently through the water, parallel to the ship, adjusting position with cold precision. It didn't need to surface fully. It only needed alignment. One clean shot. That was all. Inside the ship, systems strained to keep up. A gun crew rushed to their station, only to realize the angle was wrong. Too close, too fast. Sonar screamed with conflicting signals as water churned violently beneath the keel. Depth charge crews waited for the final command that refused to come. Drop now and they might miss. Wait too long and there wouldn't be time. Every man aboard felt it, the narrowing of the moment below deck. The cook was thrown slightly off balance as the ship adjusted course again. Pots clattered despite being secured. The vibration through the bulkheads became jagged, uneven, like a heartbeat losing rhythm. He didn't think, he reacted. He ran, not toward safety, not upward, but deeper into the galley storage area, where heavy supplies were strapped down against rough seas. Barrels, crates, metal lids. Objects never meant to move quickly, let alone be used in combat. Above him, shouts echoed through steel corridors. Someone yelled about a jammed mechanism, a weapon refusing to engage. Another voice swore loudly, raw panic. Breaking through training. The cook's mind moved with terrifying clarity. He remembered the stories. Not official report stories sailors told softly, late at night, of U-boat captains hesitating when something unexpected happened, of submarines relying on precision, on the enemy behaving exactly as predicted. Surprise was dangerous underwater. Confusion could mean death. He didn't know much about submarines, but he knew people, and he knew fear. The ship lurched again, harder this time. A warning siren began to wail, then stuttered into silence. Power flickered. Somewhere, metal shrieked as something was forced beyond tolerance. Enemy off our side. Someone screamed above him. That was close. Too close. The cook grabbed the nearest metal barrel and shoved with all his strength. It barely moved. He cursed, planted his feet, and tried again. His back screamed in protest. His hand slipped on cold steel slick with condensation. He didn't have time to think about why this was insane. He tore at the securing straps. Fingers clumsy and shaking, then braced his shoulder against the barrel and pushed again. This time it rolled slow at first, then faster, slamming into the bulkhead with a deafening clang that reverberated through the ship. The noise was shocking. Too loud, completely wrong. He didn't stop. He shoved another barrel loose. Then another. Metal scraped against metal. Crates tipped and crashed. Lids flew free. Tools spilled across the deck, clanging and skidding. The galley erupted in sound from outside. Through the hull it must have felt like chaos, like machinery tearing itself apart. Like something catastrophic was happening within the ship. That was the point. Above deck. Officers froze for a fraction of a second as unfamiliar vibration and noise surged through the ship. Confusion flared. Damage report? Internal failure? No one knew. Below them, beneath the sea. The U-boat captain felt it too. The hydrophones picked up something unexpected. Not a clean, controlled vessel, but violent internal noise echoing through the water. To a submarine tracking clean targets, it sounded like a ship in serious trouble or worse, a trap. The silhouette was wrong. The behavior unpredictable. The cook slammed one final barrel into motion, then staggered back, chest heaving, ears ringing. He had no idea if it would work. None at all. But he understood one thing instinctively. When an enemy is calculating, chaos can be lethal. On the bridge, the moment snapped. Contact lost. What the hell was that? Sonar readings dissolved into static, then nothing. The shape vanished. The water calmed unnaturally fast. Seconds passed. Too many seconds. Then, slowly, almost unwillingly, the terrible truth became clear. The submarine had broken off, deep below the surface. The U-boat altered course, choosing caution over confidence. It slipped away into the darkness, abandoning its firing solution rather than risk an unpredictable threat. The ship remained afloat. Below deck. The cook sank against the wall, breath ragged, hands trembling. Around him, the galley was wreck supplies scattered. Meals ruined, order destroyed. Above him, men waited for an explosion that never came. No torpedo struck. No fire followed, and though no one yet knew why. The ship had just survived seconds away from annihilation because of a decision no officer would ever have ordered, made by a man no one had been watching. Silence returned first, not immediately. At first it came in fragments, awkward and cautious, as if no one trusted it. The engine settled into a steadier rhythm. The shrill edge of adrenaline faded into a dull hum. Men remained frozen at their stations, muscles locked, waiting for the impact they still believed must be coming. It didn't. On the bridge, officers stared at the sonar display in disbelief. The signal that had screamed danger minutes earlier was gone. No shadow. No echo. Just the steady, empty noise of open water. Sweep again. One ordered quietly. The operator did, fingers tight around the controls. Still nothing. Another sweep, empty, a murmur spread, cautious but undeniable. He's gone. No one said submarine. Saying it felt like inviting it back. The ship continued forward, half expecting the ocean to punish that optimism. But the minutes stretched on and nothing followed. No explosion. No flash of fire beneath the hull. No roaring column of water tearing metal apart. The ship lived. Slow realization washed through the crew like warmth returning to numb fingers. Some men laughed short, shaky bursts that sounded almost hysterical. Others sat down wherever they stood, heads dropping, hands rubbing faces slick with sweat despite the cold night air. A few stared silently into the darkness, unable to let go of what almost happened. Training unraveled in the absence of danger. Weapons were secured, fingers trembling as adrenaline drained away. Someone swore softly, not in fear now, but in disbelief. Another man leaned over the rail and retched, his body finally acknowledging what his mind had been holding back. Down below, the cook stood alone in the wreckage. The galley looked as if it had survived its own battle. Barrels lay tipped over, crates split open, utensils scattered across the deck. The air rang faintly from the echoes his actions had left behind. He stared at the mess, heart still pounding, breath shallow and uneven. Now that it was over, doubt rushed in. What had he done? He replayed the moment in his mind, each slammed barrel, each crashing piece of metal searching for logic that felt dangerously thin. Had it really made a difference? Or had the submarine left for reasons entirely unrelated? Perhaps it was madness. Perhaps he had destroyed supplies for no reason at all. His hands shook as he righted a crate and began. Gathering spilled tools, movements automatic, familiar. Cleaning was something he understood. Order was safe, footsteps approached. He stiffened, bracing for reprimand, for consequences, for the inevitable question, what were you thinking? But no one came immediately. Above decks, officers tried to piece together what had happened. Sonar reports made no sense. A clean target had dissolved into chaos, then vanished. One officer remarked on the sudden internal noise, something that didn't match any known malfunction. Another suggested structural issues. A third dismissed it entirely. There was no clear explanation. Only one undeniable fact. The submarine had withdrawn at the worst possible moment for it, in the best for them. As tension drained away, humor crept back in. Fragile but necessary. Must have scared him off with our singing. Someone joked weakly. Or maybe he saw us first, another replied. Laughter followed, brittle but real. Laughter meant survival, only gradually did eyes turn inward. Down below, a junior petty officer finally stepped into the galley, stopping short at the sight of the devastation. His mouth fell open. What in God's name happened here? The cook met his gaze, unsure how to answer. The truth sounded foolish, desperate, impossible, so he said the only thing that felt honest. I thought something was wrong. The officer frowned, looking around again. He didn't scold, didn't praise. He simply nodded, as if filing the observation away for later judgment. Fix it when you can, he said, then left, alone again. The cook exhaled slowly. He felt no triumph, no surge of pride, only exhaustion and a strange hollowness that came from surviving something he hadn't fully understood. He sank onto an overturned crate, elbows on his knees. Staring at the floor. He wondered if the submarine captain had hesitated for the same reason he had. Acted because something felt wrong. Because the universe had shifted slightly off course and instincts, not logic, had filled the gap. Above him, the watch continued. The ocean remained black and unreadable, but it no longer felt actively hostile. The ship pressed on, wounded only in nerves and scattered supplies. No official announcement was made. No siren marked their escape. Survival didn't arrive loudly, it crept in quietly, almost apologetically. As the hours passed, relief settled into bones and minds alike. Men returned to routine, though their hands stayed unsteady. Coffee was brewed. Cigarettes were lit and quickly extinguished to avoid light. Sleep was attempted, but rarely achieved. The cook eventually stood and resumed cleaning, restoring order piece by piece. His body ached in places he didn't know could ache. Each breath felt heavier than the last. Still, somewhere deep inside, a question lingered. If the enemy truly had been seconds away from firing, if chaos had truly chased them off, then what did that make him? A fool? Or something else entirely? Morning came slowly, reluctantly. As if unsure whether it was welcome, a pale gray light crept across the sea, revealing nothing extraordinary, just rolling water and a tired ship that should have been gone. Watches changed. Men rubbed their eyes and straightened uniforms rumpled by a night that refused to loosen its grip on their minds. With daylight came analysis. And with analysis came questions. On the bridge, officers gathered around charts and logs, replaying the previous hours in careful detail. Sonar readings were reviewed again and again. Times were cross-checked. Bearings recalculated. Every motion of the ship was mapped. Every order retraced. The conclusion was unavoidable. The submarine had been imperfect. Position, close, aligned, patient. And then, inexplicably, it had disengaged. One officer pointed to the timing, the exact minute the sonar signal fractured into chaos. Another recalled the sudden, violent vibrations that had raced through the hull. Not mechanical failure. Not damage. Something else. Something internal and aggressive enough to travel through the water. That kind of noise, the sonar officer said slowly, would have sounded like uncontrolled machinery. Or deliberate countermeasures. A silence followed. No ship behaves like that unless it's fighting. Someone said. Or unless it wanted to be seen as unpredictable. The realization was unsettling. The enemy hadn't fled because they were attacked, but because they were confused. Because the ship had stopped, behaving like a predictable target, and that confusion had bought them their lives. Eventually, someone asked the obvious question, where did it come from? The answer led downward. By the time the cook was summoned, his nerves had settled into a heavy, anxious knot. He wiped his hands on his apron and followed the footsteps through narrow corridors, feeling suddenly smaller the closer he got to the bridge. The officers didn't smile when he entered. They studied him with the same intensity they'd used on charts just minutes earlier. Not suspicion, curiosity. Tell us what you did, one said simply. So he did, not dramatically, not heroically. He described the sounds he heard, the feeling that something was wrong. The barrels, The noise. His voice faltered once, then steadied. He didn't justify himself. He didn't claim certainty. I thought if I made it loud enough, he said quietly, they'd hesitate. No one interrupted. When he finished, the room remained silent for a long moment. Then one officer let out a short breath, almost a laugh, half disbelief. Half awe, against doctrine, someone muttered, against expectation. Another corrected. The cook braced himself for reprimand, for punishment, for being told that instincts had no place in war. Instead, the tone shifted. What he'd done wasn't trained. It wasn't ordered. But every man in that room understood the enemy well enough to grasp the brilliance of it. Submarine warfare relied on calculation, predictable behaviors, standard reactions. Chaos broke the math. Word spread quickly. By midday, the cook noticed it in the smallest ways. Sailors nodded when they passed him. Someone clapped him on the shoulder without saying a word. Another offered him a cigarette and waited while he lit it. The looks were different now, not amused or indifferent, but measured, respectful. Later, a gunner laughed outright. "Never thought a cook would save us from a U-boat," he said. "Never thought I'd have to," the cook replied, surprising himself with a faint smile. There was no medal. No public ceremony. Wartime paperwork moved slowly, and survival alone didn't always merit recognition. But stories didn't require authorization. And sailors told this one often quietly, reverently, about the night when the ship was saved not by firepower, but noise. The officers framed it carefully in their reports. Unorthodox internal disturbance may have affected enemy decision-making. The truth lived between the lines. This wasn't unheard of. Not really. Naval history was filled with moments like this, decisions made on instinct when protocols failed. Fishermen who rammed submarines. Crews who faked larger fleets with lights and sound. Ordinary men who acted decisively not because they were trained to, but because they were human. War rewarded adaptability far more often than perfection. The cook returned to his galley, to scraping pots and measuring rations, but something had changed. He stood straighter now, not from pride, but from awareness. He understood, finally, that importance wasn't assigned by rank. It emerged in moments of pressure, where hesitation meant death. That night, as darkness fell again, the ship moved forward with the same caution as before. The ocean made no promises. Danger hadn't vanished, but the crew carried something new with them. Quiet confidence born from knowing that survival didn't always come from the bridge or the guns. Sometimes it came from the least expected place. And sometimes it came from the courage to break every rule when following them would mean sinking quietly into history. The ship sailed on days passed. Then weeks, marked by shifting seas and changing skies, by routines that returned as if nothing extraordinary had ever happened. Watches were stood. Meals were served. Orders were followed. War, relentless and indifferent, continued without pause. In the galley, the cook resumed his place in the background of it all. He rose before most of the crew and slept after many had turned in. He peeled potatoes until his hands ached, stirred thin stews that steamed the air, and rationed ingredients with the same quiet care as before. No badge marked him differently. No announcement ever named him a hero. To the outside world, he was just another man feeding sailors at sea. And that was enough. Those aboard the ship never forgot. Even if they rarely spoke of it openly, they remembered the night that should have taken everything from them, and didn't. They remembered the sound of chaos rolling through steel corridors, the sickening certainty of being seconds from death, and the impossible silence that followed. They remembered who stood watch below deck when the rules failed. What the cook did couldn't be measured easily. There was no wreckage to photograph, no enemy vessel to claim. Survival left no physical proof, only an absence of disaster, a ship that kept moving when it shouldn't have. In wartime records, those moments rarely earn more than a line. In memory, they endured quietly. Years later, men would struggle to explain it to their families. They would say things like, "We got lucky," or "The submarine must have changed its mind." Only a few would admit the truth that luck favors those who act when hesitation is deadlier than failure. The cook never tried to correct them. He understood something many never would. Courage didn't need witnesses to matter. It didn't need medals or speeches or official recognition. Sometimes courage happened in isolation, fueled by instinct rather than command, and vanished back into anonymity once its work was done. History often remembers generals and machines' names of ships, numbers of victories, weapons of terrifying precision. It rarely remembers the quiet decisions made in the dark by people no one expected to matter, and yet, the outcome of that night hinged on one such decision: a tired man, a cramped galley. A moment of clarity born from listening, not leading. Had he hesitated, the ocean would have swallowed the ship, and the world would never have known why. Instead, the ship sailed on, carrying men who would see another sunrise, write another letter home, live another life beyond the war. That is how history truly turns, not always with grand strategy or overwhelming force, but with unexpected choices made in the narrow margins between fear and action. Sometimes, the difference between survival and oblivion is a single, wild decision made by someone no one was watching.